One of the things I'm really fascinated about is so let's there's the amount of rock guitar players is a lot bigger than the amount of jazz guitar players. The amount of blues guitar players is a lot bigger than the amount of jazz guitar players. But a lot of these people want to learn how to go from rock to jazz, or they want to go from blues to jazz or folk to jazz. But jazz seems like this huge mountain that's impossible to climb. It's like, we just got over a tiny hill, an anthill, and there's Mount Everest right next to us, right? And if I'm a rock guitar player, and let's say I can play the solo to Stairway to Heaven, I got my A minor pentatonic scale down, and I want to start learning how to play jazz, what would be your suggestion?
Well, I mean, just on a funny side, I mean, that Jimmy Page solo on Stairway to Heaven, when he lands on that F,
yes,
that's a big deal, man.
Yeah.
It really is, because, that's not part of the A blues scale, A minor pentatonic. So to me, that was almost like a hint at, okay, he's doing that because he wants to access that change at the moment, which I guess was just like an F chord at that time, when you're doing it squarely lands on that F in order to play the change of F major. He could have easily stayed in A minor pentatonic, as you know. So to answer your question, though, using the blues is the simplest way of going about it, because out of all the styles you just picked, including the folk guitar player, blues is such an important part of just about every type of music that we play, especially American music, obviously. So there's so much overlap in all of that, and plus just the idea of the built-in phrasing of a blues with its question and answer kind of thing between the first four measures and the second four measures, with a kind of a closing statement on the last four. You hear that in every great rock guitar player, and every great jazz guitar player, and every great blues format. If you're so. So the difference would be this: imagine the same thing or something similar. It's all the same, man.
Yeah.
Here's the difference. So what you're hearing there is like that in that 2/5 section. You have that jazz language that incorporates a lot of chromaticism and very specific outlining of chord sounds. But the first part, without the bending and the over exaggeration I was doing to kind of mimic what a blues or rock guitar player would sound. Mm-hmm. I'm doing this in a very kind way, by the way. I'm not trying to be, mocking it all.
No, you're not. You're not at all. You're not at all.
So, but that's it. So and listen, I'm not trying, let me just say that I have a really good free lesson out there, like on how to do exactly what you just said. And it really comes down to just understanding that these 2-5-1 progressions, or particularly how dominant chords work in jazz language, meaning that versus the kind that you would, like these diatonic sounding ones. Like here, like the first moment where, that moment there where I played an E7 chord into the E flat 7, mm-hmm. That's not part of the typical, blues language. And I could have blown just the blues scale like I just did through that sound. I'd be fine, because it's such a powerful sound. But a jazz musician would more like a 3, 4. Would really outline that particular sound that I just played for you. So it's just understanding where these dominant moments are. So in the blues, there are 3 of them. I just expressed once. You have that right here, that moment of dissonance.
Yeah,
where you're set up for the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord. Here's another one, which is G7, which is the 5/7 of the 2/5 I'm about to start playing. Then the 2, then that altered F. So those are the three places within the blues. And again, this is really obviously sketching over this really, really quickly. But all you need is a couple of simple phrases that you just memorize and just get those under your fingers. And then it's almost like we talked about earlier, this kind of fill in the blank thing, where you're just going to deliberately play those lines in those moments. So you start developing your ear with that, to get that sound in it. Because it's very foreign, especially to most rock guitar players who haven't listened to jazz before. It's going to almost sound wrong. And very, very quickly, I remember vividly thinking that when I first heard Charlie Parker, it sounded awful. I didn't understand it at all. Those notes sounded so wrong to my pentatonic ears, And it took me a long time to understand, not even understand, but to appreciate it, and then absolutely adore it. So, but that's it. I think the blues is the key element in order to break through. And you mentioned Al Di Meola. There are particular artists like that, and that he was really important for me too. In high school, I remember as a guy who was kind of flirting with both, and then guys like Mike Stern, John Scofield. Those guys are incredibly great transitional musicians to get into because they have so much of their playing style still firmly in just traditional rock blues,
Yeah.
And listen, and you could almost say the same thing about guys like Grant Greene too, a different era, obviously, of blues playing, but they are so firmly rooted in that. So when you hear that magic of that chromatic stuff come in at the right moment, that's what gives you that, oh man, where did that come from? That was killing. So that's it. And I think that's the way to go. And here's an answer I feel very firmly confident about, that it's correct. So just get to the blues and start learning about those dominant moments and how a dominant chord functions in jazz, because that's the biggest difference, in my opinion.
All right, let's take it one step further. So let's say I get that blues down. I learn my Billy's Bounce or, Blue Monk, something along those lines. What should I do next?
Well, I think a lot of it just kind of, it happens, naturally. In other words, let's just take the example I just gave you. As a matter of fact, I'll give you, so say I play, let me think for a second. I'm trying to think of a line that I can utilize like in every one of those moments. I'll just do something like that. So that's over. All right. So if I were playing blues, I would start by, just coming from where I'm already comfortable. But in the same spot. So I'm playing that same exact line over each one of these moments.
Yeah.
You following?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what starts to happen is once you've got it memorized and you have all that muscle memory underneath, it might turn into something like this. And again, I'm intentionally trying to keep the blues stuff that you already have together intact. It sounds great. It's never going to stop sounding great. So if I went 3, 4. So now I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And that's what naturally just kind of happens as human beings, and then what you would do is just start adding to that. In other words, that's one line. And I could sit here and go, I could play, or I can go, or in other words, you can come up with all these different variations based on that same phrase and generate tons of language out of just, one line. So, but then you go to your next solo and you transcribe another solo and you just love this one particular 2/5 and you go through that same process. Again, I'm skating over a lot of things that I would normally teach like in a one-to-one lesson online.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more to it as far as how to do it, I'm explaining. But the method is exactly what I'm describing. It's just developing, incorporating more language into your playing, getting it to a point where you have control over it so you can start manipulating it, that make it so. When you said to me that, you think I have a style or a sound of my own, I think it was something like that you had said. It's from that. It's taking from the people that I, just loved as musicians. But the process was what I just described to you. It's verbatim playing, then it transitions to something that's uniquely yours. So, yeah. But that's it. That's the method, man. I'm again, it's another one of those moments where I'm firmly confident in saying that it's the most effective way to get good fast.
Yeah, y'all got to get a lesson with Barry, and I might be after this podcast. All right, so I'm really fascinated with something that you've brought up a few times, which is sight reading for guitar. So I do quite a lot of production work, and I also tend to do sessions for people, and I do things. I've maybe done 40 to 50 sessions in my lifetime, and I've never had reading called for once, thankfully. Thankfully. That's, I know people who are like that. Usually if that's brought up, I say find somebody else. But it's never really come up. In 2025, what is the importance of sight reading for a guitar player?
Well, look, you already made the point. It's just the music industry is such a different animal now, right now. And, those days, such great stories. And there's a lot of stuff that's on, Netflix and Hulu and all that stuff about those glory days of studio sessions where, that was a requirement, man. You had to do that. And the fact that you had just said, you would willingly turn something away because you don't feel, that you have that together enough to do that. That's to me, like, in other words, that would be unheard of in the 1980s or 90s.
Yeah.
Just get that together, because that was such a big part of it. And people, like, I remember vividly, people are writing tunes. You would be handed, a handwritten piece of music in a studio, and you would play it. But back to the, I think, more important thing is just the whole idea of, places like Los Angeles, obviously, in particular, that whole studio scene, and hearing, legends like Steve Lukather talk about what that was all about. And that, again, on a side note, I don't know if I've ever heard him say, yeah, I was an amazing reader. I imagine he was, or still is, but his ability to come up with parts is legendary, and that's another aspect of it. But you're right. And it's hard for me to convince students nowadays the importance of reading, because I can't give them an example of where it's going to come into their life, other than what I just mentioned to you before. Like, in other words, if, I had started a band with some accomplished jazz musicians, I know for certain, 100%, I'm going to be getting some stuff in the mail, email of charts.